All right, here we go. Moon landing. What's the deal? I just watched Danny Jones' podcast today, and it's the moon landing skeptic guy, I forget his name, and then an astronaut that apparently went to the moon and walked on the moon. Dude's like 90 though, so he's basically senile, and he couldn't even stay with the program. Like I genuinely feel like his memory was cooked. But anyways, I've been on the fence about the moon landing since I've heard conspiracies, so I'm unconvinced. So I'm doing these LLM or these notebook LM deep research reports. So I'll walk you through what I'm doing on this one, and then we'll just hop right into it. So we're gonna get to the bottom of this maybe. So essentially, what I did with this one is I put in a bunch of moon landing conspiracy videos into the sources, right? The main ones. I typed in moon landing hoax, and I did Rogan, I did Danny Jones, I did all these different ones, and then I had it generate me a report of everything it says in those. So it generated me this PDF report of all these moon landing conspiracy points and arguments. And then I put all those into different LLMs like Gemini and like Perplexity and ChatGPT and had them do deep research reports to debunk everything. So then it spit out a bunch of deep research reports debunking the conspiracies. Then I did a bunch more deep research reports just asking for a deep, even analysis of both sides, and I also did deep research reports asking for a steelman of all the hoax arguments. So I made all those, and we're trying to get as much balance as we can. So I filled this. With reports and deep research reports from both sides, everything. And then basically what you can do if you go over here is you can create infographics, podcasts, mind maps, slides, everything. So I created a couple. I created a debate podcast and I created a regular podcast. The thing is, apparently, the regular podcast is the only one that's interactive. Oh, this says debunked. This is the final debate. Let's watch the final debate and we won't chime in, and then we'll see how it goes. So this is the debate one. Looks like this is debunked. And one last thing I'll say is like I did a test with this on some Candace Owens stuff to like see how biased Notebook LM itself will be. So I put in all of Candace Owens videos about Charlie Kirk, like 20 videos, and then made a podcast to see if it'll just say what she says and pretend like it's true, or if it'll argue it. And it actually just said everything she said was true. So it really does go off of whatever the sources are. So that's why I try to have a very extensive source list. And I put the conspiracy YouTube videos in there because I know that most of the LLMs like ChatGPT and stuff are really slow to give conspiracies a fair shake, in my opinion. So we'll see. Let's just go with this. We'll go with the interactive one so I can ask questions, and then we'll maybe do the debate after. Here we go. And go.
Okay, let's jump right into a topic that has captivated and, let's be honest, confused generations. This is the deep dive.
And today we are tackling a big one, the Apollo moon landings.
Exactly. An incredible achievement running from 1969 to 1972, but one that still has this persistent cloud of doubt around it.
It's surprisingly widespread. Surveys show anywhere from 6 to 20% of Americans, and in Russia, it's as high as 28% who think it was all staged.
So our mission today isn't to tell you what to believe. It's to give you a really comprehensive look at the specific claims from the hoax side and then the scientific, often really surprising counter arguments.
And to really understand why this debate even exists, you have to start with the context, the motive. And that motive is 100% the Cold War space race.
The pressure.
Immense pressure. President Kennedy's 1961 pledge to land a man on the moon before the decade was out, that was everything. It was geopolitical, it was existential.
So the core idea is if they feared they couldn't actually do it, faking it was the only way to win that massive propaganda victory over the Soviets.
That's the foundation of the whole thing.
Okay, so let's unpack the claim, starting with the big one. Technological impossibility. The argument that the tech in the 60s was just too primitive.
Yeah, and the first piece of evidence they always bring up is the computer, the Apollo Guidance Computer, or AGC.
I've heard the stats on this, and they're just mind-boggling. It had, what, like 4 kilobytes of RAM?
Something like that. Roughly 1/millionth the computing power of the phone in your pocket. So the question is totally valid. How on earth did they navigate in space with that?
I mean, if my smart toaster has more processing power, how do you pull off orbital mechanics?
Well, this is where context is key. The AGC wasn't trying to run a web browser. It was a piece of dedicated hardware using something called rope memory, which was incredibly stable, but crucially, it wasn't doing all the heavy lifting.
What do you mean?
Most of the really complex math, the big orbital burns, the main trajectory calculations, that was all done on enormous mainframe computers back in mission control.
Ah, okay, so they crunch the numbers on Earth.
And then just transmit the refined instructions up to the crew. The AGC was more for, final course corrections and the actual landing guidance. It was ingenuity over raw power.
That makes sense. But the next challenge seems harder to explain away. And that's about raw physical power, rocket fuel.
Right. This is probably the strongest technical argument hoax proponents have. They often cite Wernher von Braun's early calculations back in 1959.
And he said what? You'd need a rocket the size of a skyscraper.
Basically, he proposed needing 3 enormous 800,000-ton rockets. Compare that to the Saturn V, which was, a mere 2,500 tons and supposedly did it all in one launch.
And the modern comparisons make it even more convincing. I mean, Elon Musk's Starship, which is way more powerful, needs 8 to 15 refueling launches in orbit just to get to the moon.
Exactly. So people look at that and say, if we need all that today, how could they possibly do it with one launch in the 60s? It feels impossible.
So what's the answer?
The answer is strategy. It's brilliant, really. Von Braun's early idea was for something called direct ascent, where you'd land the whole giant spacecraft on the moon. NASA threw that out.
In favor of what?
In favor of the Lunar Orbit Rendezvous, or LOR.
Okay, pause there. Laura, that's the key, isn't it?
It is the absolute key. Think of it like this. Instead of sailing an entire ocean liner into a tidal harbor, you anchor the big ship offshore and just send a small rowboat to the dock.
So the command module, the main ship, stayed in orbit around the moon.
Exactly. It stayed in orbit, and only the small, lightweight lunar module, the rowboat, had to go down to the surface and, crucially, launch itself back up.
Which would take way less fuel.
Massively less fuel. It meant they only had to launch the very light ascent stage off the moon, not the whole heavy command module. It was an elegant engineering solution that completely bypassed the brute force problem.
So not fakery, just a smarter plan. Okay.
I'm not gonna lie, that sounds insane that they did that in the 60s or whatever. Like the idea that they flew a freaking thing to the moon and had some shit orbiting around the moon, and their lander goes down and then shoots back up and hits the thing. Come on, I don't know, maybe they did it, but that just sounds insane.
But even if the rocket worked, they had
Like
to fly.
if they were doing that kind of technologically advanced stuff back then, I feel like we should be so much further in the future by now.
That invisible wall of danger in space. Let's talk about the Van Allen radiation belts.
This is the most scientific of the claims, and it's a serious one. These belts are zones of high-energy particles trapped by Earth's magnetic field.
And skeptics say they're absolutely lethal, right? Citing, I think, Dr. Van Allen himself, who discovered them.
Early on, yes. They argue Apollo's thin aluminum hull, maybe an eighth of an inch thick, couldn't possibly have shielded the astronauts from what they estimate was 250 times a lethal dose.
And then there's that video clip that always makes the rounds, the one with the NASA engineer Kelly Smith from 2014.
The Orion engineer, yes.
Where he says, and I'm quoting, "We must solve these challenges of radiation before we send people through this region of space." I mean, that sounds like a directed mission. They still can't do it, doesn't it?
It's presented that way, and it's very effective. But the official explanation, which lines up with the physics, is pretty clear. Apollo never lingered in the belts. The trajectory was chosen very carefully.
So they didn't go through the worst of it.
They skirted the weakest part of the outer belt, and most importantly, they went through it fast. The total exposure time was only about an hour. Totally. A quick sprint.
And what does that do to the radiation dose?
It makes it incredibly low, around 16 rads, maybe less. To give you some context, that's like getting a full-body CT scan. A lethal dose is in the hundreds of rads.
Wow. Okay, that completely reframes the danger?
It does. In fact, Dr. Van Allen himself later came out and called the idea that the belts made Apollo impossible nonsense.
And the Kelly Smith quote.
Selectively edited. He was talking about certifying the new Orion capsule for long-duration missions months, not days, and meeting today's super strict safety standards, not about the basic ability to cross the belts quickly.
It just shows how easy it is to take something out of context. Okay, so we've covered the physics. Let's move to what most people see first. Our listeners got something to share. Let's hear it.
Can you go back and explain how the Orion guy? Oh fuck.
Oh, back to our listener. What's up?
Can you explain how the Orion astronaut or physicist, his claims were wrong? Or fuck, I don't know how to answer that question.
Oh, yeah, uh-huh.
Can you go back and explain the claims of the Orion physicist or astronaut and how it was taken out of context?
That's a great question, and it's important we clarify it.
Okay, let's unpack this Kelly Smith clip a little more, because it's a critical point.
Kelly Smith is an engineer on the modern Orion program.
And the Orion program is focused on long-duration human spaceflight, thinking about Mars trips, not just quick lunar flybys.
Right, so when he says we must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space, the challenges he's discussing are specific to Orion.
Specifically, he was talking about certifying the new capsule for months in deep space.
And meeting the much stricter 21st century safety standards. Oh, yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah, but the radiation belt's only around the Earth, right? So it's just about going through the radiation belt. Like, if you're in space for months, but you already went through the belt, who cares?
That is a very insightful point.
That's a great distinction to make.
You're right that the Van Allen belts are the immediate barrier near Earth.
But when we talk about deep space radiation for long-term missions, that's a different beast entirely.
Once you're past the Van Allen belts, you are exposed to two major types of radiation that are constant.
One is galactic cosmic rays, or GCRs.
These are high-energy particles from outside our solar system.
The other big risk is solar particle events, or SPEs, which are massive bursts of radiation from solar flares.
The problem with long-duration missions, like the ones Orion is designed for, is time.
The longer you're out there, the greater the cumulative dose from both GCIs and the chance of getting hit by an SPE.
So Kelly Smith was talking about the protection needed for that whole time for the months-long marathon.
Not just the hour-long sprint through the Van Allen belts that the Apollo crews did.
Apollo's quick transit through the Van Allen belts was manageable.
But the technology to shield humans for a trip to Mars, which could take years, that's the unsolved challenge Smith was referring to.
It's a long-term exposure to GTRs and SPUs that requires specialized shielding and hardening.
Plus, we mentioned earlier, modern electronics are super sensitive.
Yes, the older Apollo electronics were more robust against radiation interference.
But modern microscopic chips need hardening to survive a prolonged period of radiation.
So Orion needs to solve both the human dose issue for long stays and the modern electronics hardening issue, even past the Van Allen
Good
belt.
argument.
It's apples and oranges. Apollo did a quick sprint. Orion is planning a marathon with modern sensitive gear.
And this leads right back to that next point that skeptics use.
The classified data.
Proponents also point out that NASA won't release the GIGO counter readings from the unmanned 2014 Orion test flight.
Right, they classified those radiation readings as a military secret.
Which looks really suspicious, especially if you think they're hiding proof of a lethal dose from the Van Allen belts.
It definitely fuels the idea of a cover-up, especially with it talk about GCRs and SPEs.
Absolutely. But moving on from the physics and the radiation, let's move to what most people see first.
The photos and the films. The visual anomalies.
This is where the debate starts for almost everyone.
And claim number one is always the stars, or the lack of them.
The question is, why is the lunar sky pitch black in every photo?
If the moon has no atmosphere, the stars should be brilliant, even visible in the daytime, right?
Logically, yes, but scientifically, no. This is all about basic camera settings.
Okay, let's unpack this. What does a camera need to photograph the bright, sunny lunar surface?
Okay, I've already heard this argument, and it's good enough for me. The idea is that the moon is so bright because of the sun shining on it that you have to have the camera setting so that you can't see the stars, and that checks out. That's fine, so we're going to move on.
It needs a...
Oh, yeah, let's hear it.
Okay, I get this point. Let's move on to the next point.
Absolutely, we can certainly move on.
Thanks for letting us know. We appreciate the interjection.
We were just about to explain the camera settings necessary to capture the bright lunar surface.
And why that automatically excluded the stars.
To photograph the moon in direct sunlight, the camera needs a fast shutter speed and a small aperture.
Because the moon's surface in direct sunlight is blindingly... Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Can we skip the camera settings bit? I already get it.
That's completely fine.
We can definitely skip the deep dive on camera settings.
We'll just briefly summarize to keep the thread going.
To capture the bright lunar surface, the exposure time was so fast.
That the faint background stars just didn't register on the film.
So no stars is actually a sign of proper photography.
Okay, let's move to another visual favorite of the hoax theory.
Ah, the classic waving flag.
The famous quote is, "The flag was waving because there was air conditioning in the studio."
So the question is, how does a flag appear to wave in the vacuum of space?
Here's where it gets really interesting.
The flag was actually held out by a horizontally telescoping pole.
Right, so it wasn't actually waving in the air at all.
No, this was part of the early Apollo scientific experiments package.
It was designed to look stiff and fully deployed on the surface.
The wrinkles in the fabric from being folded and packed tight made it look like it was waving.
It created the illusion of movement, especially when they were manipulating the pole.
Exactly. No wind or air conditioning required for that effect.
That explains the apparent waving.
It's all in the hardware design and physics of inertia in a vacuum.
So we've tackled the technological gaps like the AGC.
And the rocket fuel problem with the Lunar Orbit Rendezvous, or LRR.
We also talked about the radiation, both the quick Van Allen sprint,
And the long-term deep space radiation Kelly Smith was referencing.
and the photographic anomalies like the stars and the flag.
It definitely seems like the scientific rebuttals are quite strong on these key points.
It really shows that even the most convincing hoax arguments often have very simple, elegant scientific explanations.
What's fascinating here is that the debate continues despite those explanations.
Why do these claims still resonate so much with the public?
Because they tap into that original Cold War doubt we talked about at the top of the show.
It makes sense. It was such a massive, improbable feat for the 1960s.
And the pressure to achieve that victory was so immense that suspicion still lingers.
Absolutely. The moon landings remain a powerful nexus of history, science, and suspicion, even today.
Well, thank you for diving into this complex topic
Okay,
with us.
that was unsatisfying. Let's look at this footage. We get to the debate, but I want to see the rover driving. Because one thing I forgot about that convinced me that it was real. Okay, that's not what I want to see. Okay, there's 2 points that I actually want to look at.
It was a pleasure. And
Oh, go for it.
Can you address the claims made in the YouTube video by that Sybil guy where he says you would need so much more oxygen to be on the moon for 8 hours and you need 2 giant tanks to be underwater for 1 hour, so how could you have so much oxygen in the spacesuit?
That's a great question, and it dives into the details of the life support system.
okay, let's unpack this claim about oxygen and diving tanks.
The comparison to scuba diving tanks is actually misleading because of the environment.
Scuba gear has to work against high-pressure water, and it uses compressed air, not pure oxygen.
The Apollo suits, specifically the PLSS backpack, used 100% pure oxygen at low pressure.
This pure oxygen system meant they carried less mass for the same amount of breathable gas.
A bigger factor is cooling. Scuba divers worry about air supply, but astronauts worry more about heat.
That's why the PLSS, the Portable Life Support System, was so essential.
The claim you mentioned often focuses on the sheer volume of air needed for 8 hours.
But the PLSS was highly efficient because it used the vacuum of space itself.
It didn't just contain oxygen, it also managed the heat rejection system, which is crucial.
They used a device called a sublimator. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Water fed to a porous plate was vented to the vacuum of space, where it rapidly vaporized.
That vaporization carried heat away, cooling the circulating water loop for the suit.
This system only works efficiently because of the vacuum. It wouldn't work in Earth's atmosphere.
So the life support system was tailored precisely for the lunar environment, making it efficient.
The pure oxygen and the evaporative cooling meant they didn't need the massive tanks suggested by the scuba comparison.
It's another case of using smart engineering to overcome what seems like a brute. Oh, go for it.
So why can't the scuba use that same technology?
That's a very logical follow-up question.
Why not use sublimation underwater?
Remember that the sublimator relies entirely on the vacuum of space.
It needs a pressure difference so dramatic that water instantly vaporizes.
When you are scuba diving, you are surrounded by high-pressure water.
That high external pressure prevents the necessary vaporization from happening.
So a sublimator would be completely ineffective for cooling underwater.
It wouldn't be able to shed heat using that method at all,
Scuba gear has to rely on traditional heat exchange methods.
like convection with the water, or radiators, which are much heavier.
The Apollo PLSS was designed for a perfect vacuum.
The scuba tank is designed for high-pressure immersion.
It's another great example of how the engineering is specific to the environment.
So the life support system was tailored precisely for the lunar environment.
The PLSS was a highly complex and effective mini life support system designed for vacuum.
Oh yeah, go on.
So the PLSS had pure oxygen, and they found a way to just combine.
Ah,
So
yeah,
the so the PLSS had pure oxygen, and they found a way to just combine it with other air for the astronauts to breathe, and they could have way more because it was pure oxygen.
That's a great summary of the system.
You've highlighted the crucial difference.
Yes, the PLSS had pure oxygen.
But it was a closed-loop system, not mixing with other air.
It fed 100% pure oxygen at low pressure directly to the suit.
That pure oxygen system allowed them to carry less mass.
And yes, that made the oxygen supply last longer for the breathing part.
But remember, the second key function, which you touched on, was heat.
Without the sublinator to cool them, they would have literally cooked inside those suits.
It managed the heat, which was just as vital as the oxygen supply for those hours of EVA.
So the PLSS had the oxygen supply for breathing using that pure low pressure system.
And it also managed the heat rejection system using the vacuum.
Like confusing a deep sea dive with a lunar EVA, as we just discussed.
That's why the comparison to scuba is...
Honestly, the idea that they would have cooked in the suit, but this thing had like so much oxygen and kept them from cooking in the suit back in the 60s, I just go, ooh, I mean, these are reasonable arguments, but it's so hard to believe. I don't know why. Just like my intuition is like bullshit. But yo, one thing that actually look at this. One thing that actually was convincing to me. Look at what I typed. Lunar buggy footag. Anyways, okay, if we watch this, look at the way this stuff is spraying. And that has to do with the low gravity. See, and I don't think you can fake that on such a big environment, because you would need to have it be a vacuum somehow. You need to create this entire area as a vacuum. And I think back in the 60s or whenever this was, they didn't have CGI to do particle simulations that good. Like they couldn't have CGI'd that shit. See the way that's kicking up? Like that's you can't fake gravity like that. I don't know though. God, it's so crazy to think if that's real or not. I can't. Oh, comments are turned off. That's crazy. Bruh, I don't know, bro. Okay, let's listen to the debate that we made. That was not that good. There we go.
Welcome to the debate. We are diving into, well, one of the most transformative periods in human history, the Apollo moon landings spanning 1969 to 1972. This achievement, it really showcased an unprecedented level of technological mastery, especially during the height of the Cold War, and it fundamentally changed our relationship with space. And yet, decades later, the question persists: was this triumph a genuine historical reality, or was it a sophisticated fabrication orchestrated to win the geopolitical space race?
And that question remains so vibrant precisely because the official narrative, well, it contains gaps that really strain credulity. When you consider the massive political motivation to deceive the world during that specific era, any extraordinary claims of success have to meet an equally extraordinary burden of proof.
So, our central question today focuses on that exact burden. Is the Apollo mission best understood as a genuine historical achievement, overwhelmingly confirmed by objective, independently verified physical evidence, or does the evidence of technological gaps and visual inconsistencies suggest that the official narrative is flawed? I'm going to argue that objective physical evidence, verified by international science and basic orbital physics, confirms the truth of the historical record beyond any reasonable doubt.
And I'll be arguing that the compounding implausibility of achieving this success with 1960s technology, coupled with documented visual and structural anomalies, forces us to maintain a critical, and I think necessary level of skepticism regarding the official story.
To establish the truth of the historical achievement, we
It's a
have to
little
begin with
lopsided.
evidence that is, well, it's utterly immune to staging. The physical material returned from the moon. The historical record confirms that NASA brought back 382 kilograms of lunar rocks. Now, these samples were distributed and analyzed by thousands of scientists all over the globe, including in nations that were, ideologically opposed to the United States. And they possess unique, verifiable characteristics that just defy any terrestrial origin. For example, these rocks are completely anhydrous. They contain absolutely no water. They exhibit phenomena like zap pits, which are these tiny microcraters caused by constant high-velocity micrometeoroid impacts that only happen when material is exposed to the vacuum of space for millions of years. And crucially, their isotopic dating and elemental composition confirm they originated in an environment totally distinct from Earth.
For the Apollo achievement to be fake, you'd need thousands of scientists globally to be in on a conspiracy to validate fake rocks, and that's an impossible coordination.
I see it from a different angle, really focusing on the sheer engineering challenge. The narrative of this flawless success, it just strains technological credulity. We're asked to believe that NASA achieved lunar travel on its very first attempt using onboard computing power that was less than a millionth of what's in a modern cell phone? It's a feat that has not been replicated in over 50 years, which suggests the difficulty was vastly understated. And beyond that, the first fatal obstacle for the crew was the Van Allen radiation belts. These belts are zones of high energy.
See, if you think that, in my opinion, if you think that the rocks are a good source of argument or a good reason we went, I don't agree, because if you're someone who thinks the moon landing happened and you think that we figured out that technology, then you also think we could easily figure out the technology to make rocks, fake rocks that seem like they're from the moon. We could at least figure that out. So the idea that NASA didn't just make a bunch of fake rocks and give them to everyone.
Particles that should have delivered a lethal radiation dose. The command module's hull was only about 1/8 of an inch of aluminum. That's a fundamentally inadequate shield against this kind of danger. Contemporary estimates even cited potential exposure far, far exceeding a lethal dose. So, if modern aerospace engineers still flag deep space radiation as a critical challenge, how did this thin shell succeed perfectly 6 times?
Okay, let's unpack the reality of that radiation claim. The perception of the belts being a fatal obstacle, it really relies on misinterpreting the physical reality of the Apollo trajectory. They didn't just aim for the most intense center of the belts. No! The mission path was meticulously chosen to skirt the weakest points, and the speed of transit was approximately 25,000 miles per hour. This meant they were exposed for only about 1 hour in total. Crucially, the dosimeters carried by the crew confirmed the actual total mission dose was around 16 rads. Now, to put that in context, that's comparable to just a couple of years of natural background radiation here on Earth, or, roughly 1/5 of what a technician might receive in a single year on the job. It was a non-lethal, survivable exposure. The data supports that.
That is a compelling point about the speed of transit, I'll grant you that. But the fact that modern engineers continue to identify this as a primary hurdle today, even with far superior shielding materials, suggests the margin of error in 1969 was terrifyingly small. Perhaps non-existent. Kelly Smith, an engineer on the current Orion program, stated as recently as 2014 that we must solve these radiation challenges before routinely sending people through. If the physics was so easily overcome by just picking a path in 1969, why is it still listed as a major design hurdle today?
The issue isn't that the technology failed. It's that the safety standards have drastically changed. Modern missions require certifying hardware and crew for long-duration exposure and repeatability under, 21st century risk management protocols. The Apollo missions were rapid, high-risk, military-style ventures. The fact remains, they survived the transit, and the data supports the low dose because of the path they chose. That's measurable data, not opinion.
Okay, even if we concede the radiation point due to the rapid transit, we still face the fundamental mechanical impossibility of the fuel requirements. Wernher von Braun, the architect of the Saturn V itself, he outlined in 1959 that a nonstop mission to the moon would require 3 massive rockets, each weighing 800,000 tons. Yet the Saturn V, weighing only 2,500 tons, allegedly did it in a single launch. That math just does not add up.
Ah, the von Braun quote. That is a classic misrepresentation, precisely because it ignores the central engineering innovation of the entire project, Lunar Orbit Rendezvous, or LOR. We need to understand that von Braun's early estimate from '59 was based on an outdated design philosophy called direct ascent, where one massive rocket would carry everything, the command module, the landing module, crew, all the fuel to land and take off again. That would require enormous mass. The genius of LOR, which was conceived by John Houbolt, was to leave the massive command module, the part that comes back to Earth, in lunar orbit. This required only the small, lightweight lunar module to go down and come back up. This single decision, which yes, required a dangerous rendezvous maneuver in orbit, it drastically cut the required landing mass by over 90%.
So that engineering solution entirely validated the Saturn V's capabilities for the mission profile they actually flew.
The physics changed because the design changed.
But if the physics were so elegantly solved by LOR, why do modern deep space projects like Elon Musk's Starship still require up to 28 orbital refuelings just to get to the moon? We have infinitely superior computing and material science today. If LOR made it feasible for a single launch in 1969, why can't we do it now with modern heavy launch vehicles without needing a massive refueling depot in orbit?
That gap comes down to economics, scale, and long-term planning, not technological failure. Starship aims to carry massive payloads, hundreds of tons, and be fully reusable. Apollo was a disposable rocket system designed for a single, high-stakes, military-political mission with a very light payload, 3 men, and a tiny lander. The current inability to replicate Apollo is not a technical ceiling. It's a budgetary and political choice focused on building sustainable infrastructure. That's a different goal entirely. And the fact remains, the Soviets, who tracked every single launch and had deep space monitoring, they publicly confirmed the launches and the trajectory. They had every political incentive to expose a hoax, and yet they said nothing. That geopolitical validation is critical to the truth.
Well,
I think the argument that the Russians and the Chinese never said anything is because they did know and they blackmailed the shit out of the U.S. and continue to, is a good argument. So I don't know. I also don't fully buy the SpaceX thing about how they supposedly need more fuel because it's a bigger ordeal, like that much more fuel. I don't know. It's hard to follow. Maybe I'm retarded.
Geopolitical silence can be bought or it can be coerced. The level of deception by the U.S. government during the Cold War, whether you're talking about the Gulf of Tonkin or domestic surveillance, it shows they were certainly willing to lie on a massive scale. If they were willing to engage in international fabrications, faking landing footage to win the space race isn't really a conceptual stretch. And this brings us back to the most accessible proof of fabrication, the visual evidence, which, to any cinematographer, clearly indicates the use of stage lighting.
Okay, let's address the visual arguments directly using the rules of physics and geometry.
I'm talking about the famous photographic anomalies where shadows appear wildly inconsistent. If the sun is the single distant light source, all shadows should be parallel, period. Yet in so many Apollo photos, shadows seem to converge, diverge, or sometimes are even 90 degrees apart from objects just a few feet away. That is mathematically impossible with just sunlight. It proves that close-range electrical lights were used to illuminate a set. And of course, there's the infamous waving flag, which ripples and stays oddly bent, suggesting movement that should be damped instantly in a vacuum.
But that argument completely overlooks the unique lighting environment of the moon. These shadow anomalies aren't evidence of stage lights, they're evidence of perspective effects on extremely uneven terrain compounded by the reflective nature of the lunar surface. Think of it this way. Just as parallel train tracks appear to converge in a photograph, shadows on a distant non-flat lunar surface will also appear non-parallel to the eye. And what's more, the light isn't only coming from the sun. The gray lunar dust, the regolith...
This is a side, but the United States has confirmed that the Gulf of Tonkin attack never happened, which got us into Vietnam.
It acts as a massive reflector, scattering light and
think of that. That one fuck up, think how many people that killed and how bad that made shit.
providing fill that brightens objects and shadows. This complex lighting environment breaks the simple expectation of perfectly parallel pitch black shadows. The Mythbusters team actually replicated this perfectly and confirmed the shadows are consistent with the physics of the lunar surface.
The problem isn't just the angle, though. It's the severity. You have a shadow from a rock pointing sharply left, while the shadow of a nearby astronaut is pointing straight ahead. That severity demands an additional light source, one that's close and directional. And on the flag, why is it bent and rippling? The famous image shows an unmistakable crease and ripple, which requires air resistance to hold its shape after it's been planted.
That crease you're seeing is accounted for by how the flag was stored and deployed. The flag was mounted on these telescoping poles, and the top horizontal support rod, it failed to fully extend. That left the material bunching up, creating the look of a ripple. The waving motion you see after planting is simply inertia. Since there's no air friction in a vacuum, any motion imparted to the fabric by the astronaut planting the pole will dampen out extremely slowly. It's not air resistance causing the wave, it's the lack of air resistance prolonging the vibration. The top rod, which was designed to make the flag look extended, is why it looks unnatural, not because of some atmospheric interference.
Okay, let's pivot back to the issue of potential fabrication, but this time, let's focus on the human element and the documentation. Bart Sibrel's found footage allegedly shows astronauts inside the command module intentionally blacking out the cabin to film a small,
Yeah.
illuminated piece of Earth
That's
through a
good
circular
evidence.
window. They then claim they're 130,000 miles from Earth when the camera work strongly suggests they are still in low Earth orbit. This suggests a pattern of faking visuals to mislead the public about their distance and position, even if they did ultimately go to space.
The interpretation of that footage requires massive leaps of assumption. To suggest they staged a complex camera trick to lie about being 130,000 miles out instead of just claiming the distance without the footage it's illogical. Why commit the felony of elaborate fraud for something that was so easily falsified verbally? And what's more, the analysis of the astronauts' body language, the fidgeting and stress people cite, it has to be seen in context. They were on top of the largest, most volatile machine ever built, about to be launched into the global spotlight. Of course they exhibited extreme stress. Their stress was from the moment, not from a lie.
But that extreme stress, combined with a willingness to potentially stage certain visuals, leads us right back to the central issue of the moon rocks, the supposed definitive proof. The controversy around the alleged Apollo 11 rock personally given to the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, which was later found to be petrified wood, introduces massive doubt about the chain of custody and authenticity of the entire sample collection. And this happens against a backdrop of Wernher von Braun himself being photographed collecting lunar meteorites in Antarctica before Apollo 11, raising the possibility of a staged source for all the samples.
Right, and that is a critical point that needs absolute clarity. The Dutch moon rock, and you can imagine me using air quotes there, was an unofficial personal gift from a US ambassador, not a NASA-certified, scientifically controlled sample. Its chain of custody was broken, its origins were never officially documented by the scientific community, it was a souvenir. You simply cannot allow one misplaced, unofficial token to dismiss the 382 kilograms of scientifically analyzed material that have undergone rigorous adversarial testing by labs all across.
That's the other thing. If there's lunar asteroids or meteors that have come from the moon and landed on Earth, and NASA just collects a bunch of those motherfuckers and then hands those out. Easy peasy lie.
The world. We're talking about rocks that have unique isotope ratios, confirming they came from the moon, not from meteorites found in Antarctica. The differences are verifiable, not conceptual. To dismiss this evidence, you have to assume our mathematically impossible global conspiracy involving thousands of geologists, chemists, and physicists who have spent decades analyzing these samples and confirming their cosmic weathering and unique composition. The pursuit of truth requires us to weigh that impossible conspiracy against the verifiable physical proof.
I just don't buy that the chain of custody could be considered inviolate, not when we know the motivation for deception was so high. The unresolved technological requirements, especially that radiation hurdle that contemporary engineers still talk about, and the visual and documentary contradictions, they are sufficient to maintain a credible level of skepticism. If the evidence supporting the achievement is so perfect, then why do these contradictions persist with such clarity?
The contradictions persist because they rely on photographic misinterpretations and conjecture about technological limits that fail to account for the unique physics and the really innovative engineering employed back in 1969. The historical truth is supported by three pillars: the verified physical matter of the moon rocks, the active retroreflectors still used today by observatories to measure lunar distance, and the geopolitical reality that the USSR would have instantly exposed a fabrication.
Burden of proof. The question is whether the evidence of technological gaps and visual trickery is enough to reveal a successful propaganda operation. And the enduring inconsistencies suggest that burden of proof has not been fully met.
The source material offers profound arguments on both sides, demonstrating that rigorous intellectual challenge is essential for clarifying truth, even when we're examining the most...
I don't know. I think I don't think this notebookLM thing is good for debates or controversial issues. I think it's good to just kind of learn about established shit. This is the second kind of controversial issue I've done on here, and I just don't feel like it does necessarily a good job of giving you both sides. And I don't know what it means about my psychology that like everything about the moon landing to me feels fake and wrong. And I just can't deny that it just seems like bullshit. I'm like, how the fuck? Like, if you just laid out the propositions that they want us to believe about it, they're all very hard to believe. And my intuition just goes the opposite way. However, I do know that being a human, intuition isn't reliable all the time. And especially intuition about space flight, gravity, the moon's surface and how shit should or shouldn't look, how spacesuits should work, etc. The intuition's not calibrated, so I understand that. I do know that the government's a fucking liar, though. It's really hard. What does it mean that I can't make up my mind? I don't know. I mean, I think, I mean, it's literally crazy to imagine right now if someone put a gun to my head and said, "Is it real or fake?" and I die if I get the wrong answer. I genuinely feel like 50-50. I genuinely feel like if I right now if I was gonna die if I didn't get the right answer, what would I say? I think I would say we didn't go. I think I would say we didn't go. It's so hard though. I don't know. Because like the arguments why we did go are good, but it's like, bro, the government is a professional liar, sneaker, cheater, false thing fabricator. Ay, ay, ay. Not sure, dude. Yeah, I don't think that this particular way of learning about it with notebookLM is the right way. I think it's better, like I said, for other things, but I'll show you some of the other ones I want to do. So I got the Islamic dilemma, which I guess that's a debate, so I don't know how that one will come out. I got which one do I still got to do? The rhetorical trinity, ethos, pathos, and logos, right? Understanding those. So that's just like information. I got where did the idea of heaven and hell come from? What's this? Oh, I don't need this. This one can go away. Delete. Let's delete the moon landing one. Delete. Yeah, I'm excited for the... Oh, I'm not even showing you these. Where did the idea of heaven and hell come from? I got to do that one. I got to do the Islamic dilemma and the rhetorical trinity. What's in this one? Nothing? Okay. Delete. Anyways, hit the subscribe and check out the links in the description. Get me on Substack. It's free if you want to keep up to date with me, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace.